All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I am really excited to present Ryan Leaderman, who is a longtime friend from the trenches of many a planning commission and city council meeting, and have gotten to know him and had the pleasure of his company too many evenings in the city of Garden Grove. But super excited to have him and welcome him to give us some insight on where we are now that the budget has passed and we have these two new laws to deal with. Hopefully, we find freedom in these laws. So just by way of a brief introduction, Ryan Leaderman is a Los Angeles land use attorney who focuses his practice on entitlements for complex land use planning and mixed use developments in California. Mr. Leaderman represents clients in all aspects of California environmental quality law. In recent years, his practice has grown to include a particular focus on housing, single family, townhouse, small lot subdivision, and multifamily, as well as mixed use developments. He uses his knowledge of rapidly evolving California laws, including the HAA, State Density Bonus Law, SB 330, and ADU law, and builder's remedy to obtain approvals for his clients' projects. And that is really the context in which I had the pleasure to get to know and work alongside, or at least public comment alongside Mr. Learman. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you because they are definitely not here to hear me.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that kind intro. And Elizabeth, I think you're forgetting also the Placentia, the late night in Placentia as
Oh,
well.
I forgot about that one
That
too.
that was a fun one. So, hi everyone. I'm Ryan Leaderman, and I'm here to talk about some of the exciting work that our legislators and Governor Newsom have gifted us in California. And this year, the 2025 budget delivered big CEQA reforms for housing. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those changes coming up or that have already been implemented because the law already went into effect. It was sort of like a blitzkrieg. And maybe I could give a little bit of background as to what just happened and why. CEQA has actually been around for longer than I've been alive, and I was born in the 70s. And CEQA was enacted in 1970. And it's been continually expanded over time. Initially, it just applied to public agencies, but then with the Mammoth decision, it was applied to private projects as well. And it's some of the advocates, like my colleague, my partner, Jennifer Hernandez, have been advocating for CEQA reform for a very long time. And Jennifer has put out a number of publications. They've been cited in case law as well. And she's published articles and so forth talking about the impacts of CEQA. And in some respects, how CEQA is almost like Jim Crow laws, that they make housing more expensive, they redline housing, and they make it, CEQA has made it much more difficult to build housing, not just in greenfield areas where there's open space and little critters, but also for infill development as well. And our past governor, Governor Brown, called CEQA reform the Lord's work, and he never did it. So I don't know about his relationship with the Lord. So I guess we have Governor Newsom, or as I like to say, Daddy Newsom gave us a really nice gift this year. And that's in conjunction with some really hard work from Senator Weiner and then Assemblymember Wicks. There's also a generational move, including the work that Elizabeth does, and then our friends in the YIMBY movement, as well as the Housing Coalition up in the Bay Area. So what's going on right now is that this legislation, AB 130, SB 131, are really the most meaningful, impactful CEQA reform in decades. And I'm not one to exaggerate or be dramatic. This is a really big change. So just some highlights. I'm not going to cover everything. There's just a lot to cover. But hopefully we'll give you at least a little bit of an outline as to what some of these changes are. One, there's a new clean, and I'll explain it later what that means. CEQA exemption for infill housing under 85 feet. The exemption does apply also to buildings for housing greater than 85 feet in height, but that comes with prevailing wages. And so that's why I'm not calling it clean. There's now a shot clock for agencies to act on applications, both for ministerial projects and then also as a result of the new CEQA exemption. There's a really cool new CEQA reform, although who knows how it's going to be litigated just yet. And it's a near miss CEQA. So if you miss one item from qualifying for an exemption, you are able to analyze that one sole issue. And there are a whole bunch of wrinkles, and we'll try to go through them as well. There's a new CEQA exemption for housing element rezonings, and of course there are exceptions to that as well. But what's really neat about this is you can have housing element rezonings and then your new infill exemption, and potentially something could be completely exempt from CEQA, which is kind of amazing, from the rezoning through the housing element to your project approval, which is pretty wild. There are new rules with vehicle miles traveled, although I'm not really going to touch much on vehicle miles traveled today. And then there are a whole bunch of other changes, like with ADUs or some surgical changes with the coastal zone, some changes as well. Today, I'm not going to cover non-housing CEQA exemptions that were in the legislation. So there's stuff about advanced manufacturing facilities, daycare centers being exempt. So I'm not going to cover it. Limits on coastal commission appeals, not going to cover it. SB 330 amendments, I'm not going to cover them, but basically instead of expiring in 2030, there's no expiration date. A really important thing that I'm not going to cover, but I guess I'll cover for a few seconds right now. There's a building code freeze. So, and that's going to last for 6 years. And what's been going on the past several years is there have been all these changes on a local level to the building code for changes, and that somewhat drives developers and housing constructors a little bit nuts, because the code just gets more and more stringent, And so there are some exceptions to this. So if it's for like wildfire mitigation, if a building code freeze or building code changes were sort of in the queue, there's a deadline where they can be implemented for another 2 or 3 months. And then if there's a profound health and safety impact, that could go ahead and be implemented. But the general takeaway, the big takeaway is you're not going to have the building code change like every year and get more and more stringent. So that's a huge benefit for housing developers. So probably the biggest one that we'll spend the most amount of time on today is the new CEQA infill, this new CEQA exemption for infill housing. It's a statutory exemption, is baked into the Public Resources Code. It exempts qualifying housing-rich infill projects from CEQA. And just a total side note, I would love to take questions. So maybe at a certain point we can break if there are questions, and then Elizabeth can field them and let me know there are questions, and then we can take them. So this is different from a Class 32 infill exemption. And the Class 32 infill exemption still exists. And what the Class 32 infill exemption has, though, is it still requires technical analysis for various different items like air quality, noise, water quality, traffic, and there are a whole bunch of qualifying criteria. So here, with this new exemption, there are no exceptions to the exemption. There are no unusual circumstances exemption to this new CEQA exemption. So it's pretty powerful. And you really don't need technical studies to opt into this new AB 130 new CEQA exemption. And then CEQA does have, or there are other ministerial options that are available, but a lot of the ministerial options to avoid CEQA review require affordable housing, below market, BMR, below market rate housing. And in order to utilize this new CEQA exemption, there is no BMR requirement. So that's pretty powerful. One of the I don't want to say hindrances, but one of the conditions in order to use AB 130 is a required tribal consultation process. And that does take time, whereas a class 32 exemption doesn't have any sort of set time. Of course, it takes months to prepare the technical studies that are part of a class 32 exemption. So here there is a tribal consultation process. And I'll try to go over some of the milestones or some of the deadlines. So that is a minus associated with this because it could take up to almost about 6 months to go through that process if it takes the full amount of time that's allocated for tribal consultation. So you're wondering, how do you qualify for AB 130? What are the criteria? So it has to be a housing project, which means at least 2/3 residential. It could be on a site up to 20 acres in size, or up to 5 acres if it's a builder's remedy project. So that class 32 infill exemption that I just mentioned, that has a 5-acre limitation. So this is pretty powerful in that it could cover a much larger size project due to the size, due to the area. It has to be in an incorporated municipality or an urban area, and the site must be previously developed with urban uses or surrounded by them. And it's pretty flexible. It has to be surrounded. There are a whole bunch of different options to qualify for being surrounded by urban uses, such that like 75% of the perimeter needs to be urban use, but there's a really great exception. Let's say, I don't know, let's say you're near a stream and somehow that stream or a park is not considered an urban use. This new statute allows you to go up to a 1/4 mile outside the perimeter of the site. And if 75% of the uses are urban within that 1/4 mile radius, then you could potentially qualify, which is kind of amazing. It's pretty flexible. Uh, Lord help someone to figure out how to go ahead and go out a 1/4 mile and determine that all those uses are urban. But I think it's a really great solution when you're immediately abutting a use that's not urbanized, and that gives you a second chance. The project must be consistent with the zoning, general plan, and coastal program. So it doesn't quite say how you do this consistency analysis. I could see some conflicts with the city or a county in the use of the exemption in determining that you're consistent with the applicable general plan or zoning. But with the class 32, you have to be consistent anyway. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal presumptively. And then if a project does do state density bonus law and seeks incentives or waivers to deviate from whatever sort of applicable standards, that should give you, or that does give you, a free pass about consistency for those items that you're seeking relief from whatever sort of general plan or zoning standards. There is a density requirement. It's based on a Mullen density, and I'm sure most of you are like, what? What does that mean? Generally speaking, in an urbanized area, a fairly large city, that's going to be 30 dwelling units an acre, and then 50% of that. So that would be 15 dwelling units per acre. If you're in a very small suburban jurisdiction, when I say very small, I mean like you're under 25,000 people, and then it might be 20 dwelling units an acre. And then if you're in a smaller county, I don't know, somewhere like maybe Mono County, it might even be less than that. But generally speaking, for most of the jurisdictions in Southern California, it'll be 50% of that 30 dwelling units per acre, unless you're a much smaller jurisdiction, like maybe like Bradbury, which has a very small population. Also no demolition of structures listed on a historic register. So, if a city thinks it might be historic, but they haven't listed it, that's not a bar to the use of this. It's a pretty powerful tool. So a lot of NIMBYs will try to nominate a site as historic, or a city typically requires um, a developer to do a historic study if it's an older building. And even though a project site may not be listed as historic, under CEQA, the city would determine that to still be a historic resource, even though it's not listed. With this exemption, that goes out the window. It's either listed or it's not listed. So it's a pretty powerful item. I think the no hotels was a sop to Unite Here 11 and some of our union friends who just want to have labor requirements. They don't want to make it easier to create new hotels, which is maybe not the best business plan for them, but whatever, that's not none of my business. So unless the application was already complete as of January 1, no hotels in order to go ahead and utilize this exemption. This exemption also has the SB 35 qualifying criteria. And I'm sure many of you are like, huh, what does that mean? So it can't be on farmland, it can't be on wetlands, can't be on habitat area. And then for other impact areas or other sort of categories, there are some limitations. So you could potentially be in a fire hazard zone, but then you have to meet certain requirements and mitigation standards that are built within the building code or the fire code that the local agency has implemented. And similarly for hazardous waste site, uh, probably want to avoid that, but generally speaking, if there's a determination that is adequate or okay for a residential use, then you could get around this prohibition. So just be very careful with the qualifying criteria. And if you do find that there's a conflict, you really need to pay close attention to see if you will still qualify for this exemption. There are requirements now about proximity to the freeway or to any freeway. So you could be within 500 feet of a freeway, but that you must meet additional air filtration and air quality requirements. So like your intake vent cannot be facing the freeway. There needs to be at least MERV 16 filters. And then this is going to trip up a bunch of projects that might already be in the queue. You can't have balconies facing a freeway. Of course, no one quite knows exactly what that means to be facing a freeway. What if your property is at an angle to a freeway? So is that maybe those two sides that is it one side? I think you'll probably have some litigation. The conservative approach would be anything facing a freeway, no balconies on that side. As a condition of approval, a project will be required to do a phase 1 environmental assessment. And then if a recognized environmental condition is identified, then you're going to have to mitigate that as well. It's somewhat interesting in that for a class 32, if there would have been a recognized environmental condition, that could have been seen as an unusual circumstance that could have taken you out of qualifying for a class 32. So this is much more generous that it allows projects, even if they have a recognized environmental condition, because it requires mitigation, whereas with another sort of with a class 32, you can't have mitigation. So it's really expansive and we'll cover a lot more projects. So this might be tricky for folks to understand and see, but There are a number of exemptions that exist right now. So AB 130, this is the new CEQA exemption. And this is the class 32 infill one that we were just talking about. But many of these projects require below market rate housing. So this affordable housing exemption requires 100%. It requires California Tax Credit Allocation Committee agreement. There's another exemption where 100% needs to be below market. This one also requires requires infill or requires inclusionary housing. So for these, and remember with AB 130, there's no requirement for inclusionary housing. And although I would recommend is that you get relief from some development standards with waivers and incentives, that you could have some, but clearly it's not like 100%. And then for some of these other exemptions, labor is required. With AB 130, there is no prevailing wage requirement if the project is below 85 feet. If it is above 85 feet, then there is a trigger for prevailing wages and a skilled workforce. And then this one over here, this exemption is sort of many of these exemptions require prior environmental review, so you sort of tier off them. And some of them have to be have done, some of the prior environmental review needed to be done within the past 5 years. So with AB 130, nope, you don't have to have prior environmental review. So it's pretty neat, and it's not as restrictive. And here are all these criteria over here, like no more than 5 acres, no more than 100 units, no more than 100 units, has to be served by utilities. This one has to be consistent with the general plan. So although with AB 130, it does have to be consistent with the general plan and zoning. So the takeaway is that in comparison, it's a lot less restrictive, and that's what we're trying to show with this slide. So there are a whole bunch of other ministerial pathways. There's not going to be a quiz. You're probably looking at this like, what does this mean? Folks may have heard of SB 35. That is a ministerial pathway. It's not available in every jurisdiction. It depends on how successful a city or county has been with meeting its RENA numbers. And so depending on compliance, one, if the city has been a rock star and SB 35 might not be available, other jurisdictions have not accomplished as much housing, so then maybe it's a 10% or 20% or a 50% low income requirement. But there's a 90 or 180 day process. This one requires 100% low income in order to be ministerial. And when we say ministerial, it doesn't trigger CEQA. Ministerial projects are not discretionary, and because they're not discretionary, there's no ability to add any sort of CEQA requirement on them. You can't mitigate them. It's just by right. AB 2011, this is the one that allows projects on commercial corridors. It's anywhere from, I think, a commercial street that's anywhere from 70 to 100 feet wide, or at least 70 feet wide. And then this one is for housing for homeless. So basically, if you have a market rate housing project or one that has mostly market rate housing, you can't use this one. I mean, in AB 2011, you may not qualify. This one is just, it's so generous with the criteria that a lot of projects will qualify, whereas with AB 2011, if you're on a small street or you're not on a commercial corridor, you're not going to qualify for this. If you're not a homeless project, you're not going to qualify for this. AB 35 may not be available. So that's why AB 130 has such a tremendous benefit. It really broadens the amount and number of housing projects that would qualify for this exemption compared to some of these existing ministerial pathways. labor. Let's talk a little bit about the labor requirements in AB 130. So all projects, including ones that are less than 85 feet, are subject to this labor code section. And basically, I think the big upshot is that the development proponent is ultimately liable for direct contractor, subcontractor wage disputes. So that is a big deal. Whereas the developer wasn't necessarily on the hook previously. So if you are utilizing this new CEQA exemption, that does expose a developer to claims about unpaid wages, some sort of disputes about like vacation time or overtime may not have been paid. Now, presumptively, the developer in whatever sort of contract he has with the contractor might seek an indemnity provision or insurance provisions in order to cover for some of the bad deeds that might happen. But that does expose, there is some potential exposure over there. And then also, in a weird twist, I think, 100% affordable projects that are using this new CEQA exemption must be prevailing wages. So even though they're 100% affordable, they're going to be subject to prevailing wages. Now, when we saw the previous slide or previous slides, there are other exemptions available. So some of those other exemptions may not require prevailing wages. So you're going to want to take your time to sort of, if you are doing a 100% affordable project, maybe AB 130 may not be the best option if there's another option that avoids prevailing wages. So projects that are greater than 85 feet in height must pay prevailing wages and hire a skilled and trained workforce or enter into a PLA. So you're basically doing prevailing wages. Now, there's a question like 85 feet, where do you measure from? And I think that the reason why the statute chose 85 feet because that's generally known to be the difference between high-rise construction and non-high-rise construction. And generally speaking, high-rise construction, being 85 feet in height or greater, you oftentimes do need skilled labor. Those are the folks, the steel and concrete, and they have the expertise in order to construct these taller buildings. But there's no definition as to how to measure height in the statute. So I could see that as potentially being an area of controversy or future litigation is going to occur regarding how to measure that. Let's see, let's go to the next, well, how about this? If maybe there are questions right now so far on the CEQA exemption?
Yes, we had one question, and the question was, can you utilize the near miss to get out of the no balconies facing freeway exemption? Sorry, rule.
Potentially you could, but in my opinion, there's a lot of hair with the near miss. And we'll cover near miss in a little bit. There are qualifying criteria associated with it, but it's sort of like then you have to analyze fully what is the impact of having those balconies, and then you have to go through Appendix G. You have a huge number of questions that you have to go ahead and analyze. So aesthetics, well, aesthetics is probably not a big deal to analyze for balconies. But bioresources, cultural resources, air quality, hazards. So you do have all these other sort of technical analyses that you may have to do as a result of it. And so what does that mean to have the balconies and focus the environmental analysis just on this one issue? It's an open question. I think it'll probably be litigated as well. And it may not be that big of a deal to analyze what that one issue is, but it will require additional analysis.
We have one other question which says, basically can AB 130 be used on on a project that has already started their CEQA process? Like, can you, if your CEQA is under review, can you pivot to be an AB 130 project?
I do think so, but it requires some negotiation with the city. So there is a provision in AB 1633, which was added into the law, went into effect in January, about giving like notice to the city about a CEQA violation. And it has very stringent timeframes on it. So if the environmental review has already started, that means the project's already been deemed complete. I would just recommend working with the city and say, and being somewhat forceful and say, hey, there's this new CEQA exemption. You must go ahead and utilize it. It's going to save so much brain damage. But remember, this does require tribal consultation. And the tribal consultation process could take approximately 6 months or just under 6 months, if it's stretched out to its full timeline. So there may be strategic reasons why a project would not want to convert to this new CEQA exemption. Because let's say you're about to have your hearing next month, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I want to use AB 130 because the litigation risk is much lower, it's a much more simplified document. You still have the tribal consultation that absolutely is required. So for like that class 32 infill exemption that I keep on mentioning, that doesn't require any tribal consultation. And all of a sudden, if you have to take 6 months to start this process, or maybe 4 months, that could be a material delay in the project. So I would probably try to work with the city on this and really think, do you want to do it? And then you probably also want to do some analysis ahead of time just to make sure that you truly would qualify for AB 130 for that new housing infill exemption.
All right, those are the questions so far, so please keep going.
Okay. Shot clocks for action on projects. So one of the neat benefits for the new legislation is that there are time limits that did not exist before. So previously, and until June 30th of this year, there were timelines in the Permit Streamlining Act about when a city must, or a local agency must approve a project, but they weren't really that enforceable. They only sort of kicked in until after, let's say, the EIR was done, or after the neg deck was done, or after the exemption determination was made. And there was no gun to the head to the city or to the local agency to complete that environmental review. So the city could, unfortunately, drag its feet, and you can almost never force the city to go ahead and certify the EIR. So that was one of the issues. And then previous to this new legislation, there were some very funky, weird notice requirements. So at the end of the day, it would be very hard to enforce a CEQA deadline. But now it's different. The world is completely different. So if you're doing AB 130, there are new shot clocks that are enforceable. So basically, the tribal consultation must start within 14 days of that application completeness. Like if it's an exemption, if this exemption works for your housing project, the tribal consultation must start within 14 days. And it triggers all these sort of deadlines. And I see Bill's on part of the audience, and we talked about Bill's one of my clients, and we talked about this in relation to a project the other day. 14 days, and then the notice goes out, the city to the tribe, the city notice to the tribes tells the tribes that they've got 60 days to respond, and then the tribe responds, And then there's a 14, they have like 14 days to start, the city has 14 days to start the tribal consultation process. And then there's another 45-day process to do the consultation process, where the developer can elect to participate as part of that consultation process with some conditions. And then the city can extend that consultation process by another 15 days, but then it's done. And then once it's done, the city has, or the local agency, I keep on saying the city because mostly it says city, but it could be a county. The local agency has 30 days to act on the project. That is a tight time frame. It's a very tight time frame. I don't know how some of the cities are going to do it, frankly, because it is not a long time. That 30 days ends upon the tribal consultation when it finishes. That's pretty amazing. Ministerial projects, when a complete application is submitted, which basically is like all the materials for that ministerial project, the local agency must approve or disapprove it within 60 days. That's kind of amazing also. It's a very short time frame given previously there wasn't exactly a gun to the head of the local agency to go ahead and approve or disapprove.
Ryan,
Uh
are these calendar days or business
yeah,
days?
calendar days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nobody's going on vacation anytime soon.
Well, yeah, and then if they don't meet these deadlines, it's an HAA violation and Housing Accountability Act violation, which is a potential denial of the project. So it's a pretty powerful tool, that just did not exist previously.
Well, I'm like thinking of, in some of these smaller cities where it's like the development director and one staff planner, if anybody's out on any kind of leave, I wonder if there's like a new line of business here for some of the firms that provide like contract planners. I wonder if their business line will expand and they'll start doing some of this work because the timeline is just going to be so tight.
Yeah, and to me, it seems like a lot of the work that a lot of consultants do right now with respect to housing projects may have just evaporated. However, there might be a role at the front end to submit the AB 130 documentation to support the fact that a project qualifies for this exemption. Just kind of front load it and do the sort of general plan and zoning consistency analysis. And another potential opportunity is to contract with a city to go ahead and process this. And you're absolutely right. I imagine a number of smaller jurisdictions have no idea what just hit them, and that they may be liable under the HAA for a project denial. And under the HAA, if it's considered a denial, there could be fines up to $10,000 per unit, which could be very significant. So, additional elements of the new legislation, there's housing element CEQA reform. And so, under housing element law, the housing elements for every jurisdiction, the housing element needs to be updated every 8 years. And then oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes there needs to be rezoning in order to meet the regional housing needs allocation. And so that happens when there's just not enough sites that can be accommodated to meet the RENA demand. And then sometimes rezoning needs to happen. And the rezoning it's a little bit beyond this, but that takes about up to 3 years from the housing element certification deadline. And then a number of agencies, a number of jurisdictions, they prepare EIRs. That might go out the window. Now, you're not going to have an exemption for, let's say, land that's like habitat land or natural land that has some sort of natural value or habitat value. But if you're talking about a city where it's pretty developed and you don't have like wildlands that would be rezoned, you may just not need that EIR. That's going to be a major administrative burden that's lifted. Now, there's a minus because some projects have relied on the housing element EIR to further their project. And I know we've done it where we say, oh, the project is consistent with the housing element EIR. So if now all of a sudden there's no housing element EIR, there's nothing to tear off of. But if your project is an infill project that qualifies for AB 130, you're going to be exempt from CEQA anyway. So, so you can have this world in which the housing element rezoning may not be subject to CEQA. And then all of a sudden you have AB 130, this new CEQA exemption, and you're exempt from CEQA for your housing project. There may be a situation where like you just escaped CEQA, which is kind of mind-blowing. That just hasn't happened previously. So it's pretty powerful. So this I know there was a question or two about near miss. And so that's also part of the new legislation that the governor signed. So, and this is already the law. It went into effect. Oftentimes our laws, they're passed in Sacramento and it's the following January when they go into effect, or even a year later, the following July. This is the law now. So this is in effect right now. So if a project would qualify for a CEQA exemption, including the new CEQA exemption, but for a single condition of that exemption, CEQA review for the housing project is limited to the environmental effects caused by that single condition. So I know we had that question earlier about the balconies, and maybe the balconies, I'm not so concerned as to like what is the environmental, what are the environmental impacts caused by having balconies? But so let's say you have 20 acres, but you want to do a 25-acre project, right? So you could potentially use this near miss exemption in order to go ahead and qualify. But what are the environmental impacts of that extra 5 acres? Like, I don't know, and no one really knows. And I think that's going to be the new frontier of CEQA litigation potentially, as to like, well, what does it mean to analyze and what are the environmental impacts of that streamlining? What does it mean environmental impacts that are solely caused by this one condition? So, and then one of the other benefits, or two of the other benefits, you do not have to analyze alternatives or growth-inducing impacts. So I think it's neat in concept, but it should be a little bit interesting to see how this near miss gets analyzed and how conservative the analyses might be. Okay, so well, here we go. So also as part of the near miss, it has to be similar in kind. So if it's a completely different type of category, then it just would not apply. If you've got two criteria, then it doesn't apply. So it's just that one. And given that Sacramento is not finding oil and gas infrastructure on its favorable list, so if you've got an oil or gas infrastructure project, that's not going to be subject to this near miss exemption. And then also natural and protected lands. So if you've got like habitat on your site, you're not going to be able to use that near miss exemption. So, and then again, we could keep on going back to this 25-acre example, and then you've got the 5 extra acres. Well, what needs to be studied? What is an effect that is caused solely by the presence of having these 5 extra acres? I think there'll be a lot of discussion about this, and I don't think there's going to be peace and harmony as to how to analyze that soul condition. So VMT, that was also addressed in the new legislation, and just VMT is even further enshrined into our analyses now. So it doesn't get rid of VMT. And VMT has been criticized significantly as sort of like, how do you even analyze vehicle miles traveled? What is the methodology? It seems a little bit fake as to like what sort of inputs you put into the model. But we're stuck with VMT, and a lot of the controversy about what just was put into the legislation is all of a sudden there's now a push to potentially have VMT mitigation, which means there's going to be new VMT mitigation fees that I'm sure are going to come. But unlike with like school impact fees and SB 50, which says you pay your school impact fee, you mitigate your impact on schools, there's nothing in this legislation that says, okay, you pay this forthcoming VMT mitigation fee, and that presumptively mitigates your VMT impact to less than significant. So you're going to potentially have the worst of all worlds over here, in that you're going to be subject potentially to a new fee that needs to be created, which doesn't exist right now. And it still may not be enough to mitigate to less than significant. So that's coming down the pike as well. What's next? Um, Cleanup bills. So, maybe there'll be further direction about the 85 foot height limit. And how do you measure that? Maybe there'll be some guidance on that. I don't know. Maybe there'll be some further guidance on the soul condition. There are some there needs to be some cleanup language about the ministerial shot clock starting when the application is deemed complete, because there is some ambiguity as to whether that triggers back to the filing of your preliminary application or your actual application. And if that shot clock ticks back to when you submit your preliminary application, then your clock has started ticking before you've even filed your clock has started ticking for your approval of your project for 60 days before you've even submitted your actual application. So I think it's just, that's something that could be, cleaned up a little bit. Permit application reform, Assemblyman Haney in the Bay Area out of San Francisco has proposed having a uniform application list. So we'll see what happens. And then Wiener has proposed SB 79, which would have higher density housing near transit. And I don't know if that's going to come into law or not. But that sort of creates like this whole separate rezoning or separate like density that would be allowed near transit. So I can imagine a lot of people are going to lose their minds if that does come into law, because it would substantially upzone certain areas just based on proximity to transit. So at Holland Knight, we've got a team of folks. I'm just one of many. And so some of my colleagues over here, I believe Kevin is in the room right now as well, and he's out of our Orange County office. Any of us could go ahead and answer questions and try to address some of the AB 130 and SB 131 questions. And we're all across California, Century City, Newport Beach. I'm here in Los Angeles, and I've got a number of colleagues in San Francisco. So that's it for me, but I'm around to answer questions if there are any.
We have 8 minutes. Does anybody want to? We have a new question. Let's see what this says. How can architects or architecture students engage in this conversation on opportunities for future projects? That's a question from Greg, who presumably is an architecture student.
Well, I- you know, if you are looking at doing one of the exemptions, I think as an architect, it's probably incumbent upon you to know that, hey, well, there might be different rules if you're within 500 feet of a freeway. And you might want to go ahead and talk to your client and say like, hey, you may not want to put balconies facing the freeway because then you may not get this really fantastic CEQA exemption. And then also with development standards, there still needs to be compliance with applicable standards. And it's really important for an architect to take a hard look at those applicable development standards and understand whether the project complies with them or not. So that is, an attorney can do it, but we tend to be a little bit more expensive. And so you'll be helping out your client, I think, a little bit more as an architect in order to take that deep dive into the zoning code and the general plan in order to determine whether you comply with those standards. And that will save the client, I think, a ton of money because you'll be more informed about how to comply with whatever sort of applicable standards.
We got another question. Can you utilize the near miss for the minimum 5 acres for a builder remedy project?
I think so. If that's the one, if that's the one condition, I think.
To be determined by
Yeah, I
case
mean,
law.
so let's say you have an 8-acre project that's a builder's remedy project, but there's a 5-acre limitation in AB 130. I think you could, but you obviously have to look at all the other criteria. Remember, with the near miss, you only get one near miss. If there are two near misses, then you wouldn't qualify. So you sort of like yes, I'm saying like, okay, well, the 8 acres, great, near miss, but you really have to do a deeper dive and look at all the criteria to make sure that you qualify for everything else. Excuse me.
I think it's going to be interesting because, like, when you were talking about, the if you had a 20-acre site or 25 acres, right? And so I'm thinking to myself like, oh, maybe they'll just like split off that 5 acres and do a lot split and not have the 5 acres be part of the project site. That might work for 20 acres. It's definitely not going to make sense for 5 acres, right? From 5 to 8 acres, that's it's a much greater percentage. So you would be constraining what you could do on that site.
Yeah, there is a concept in CEQA about segmentation and about not segmenting a project.
Okay.
But maybe there already are separate lots that are part of one project site. And so you just don't include that other project because you don't have a reasonably foreseeable project on
Like
the,
on the horizon.
yeah, you just
Yeah.
maybe in the future you're going to decide what to do on that 3-acre lot. And so that way you're not going to implicate some of the segmentation issues.
I mean, I've seen a lot of projects out kind of, on the fringe have they'll have steep slopes or they'll have some, beautiful landscape that the developer wants to preserve for views or just, passive recreation. So I wonder if you'll get a lot split that splits off, they'll cluster the development in one area and then maybe that extra part will become like um, I mean, they probably don't want to make it a park because I'm sure the HOA is going to have to maintain it, not the city. But I wonder if there'll be some creative way to, spin it off and make it its own unique land use.
What's exciting now is that there are so many ministerial pathways or
Hmm.
exemption pathways that just did not exist a few years ago. And they're so nuanced and they're somewhat hard to find, but there's something called SB 1123, which allows 10 lots or less.
Mhm.
And it was recently expanded to, I believe, multifamily lots as well. So it's a way of exempting from a lot of from CEQA if you're determined to be ministerial, and then the city can't deny it. Now, with that one, there are a whole bunch of qualifications, and it's not in this legislation. But I raise it because there's so many different options now that just did not exist previously. And now with these new exemption, the new CEQA exemption, the near miss exemption, there really are further opportunities to avoid CEQA and avoid this long drawn out process. And I think it's got to help housing. It will, because it takes away a lot of the risk of the CEQA process.
Right. Can you go back and just elaborate a little bit more? You were talking about clean versus uh not clean.
Yeah, which maybe not the best choice of words. So with AB 130, when I'm referring to it as clean, especially with respect to under 85 feet, what I really mean is that there are no prevailing wages and no below market rate residential required, no inclusionary housing. It's like, hey, you meet the criteria, great. And the criteria does not include these add-ons. Above 85 feet, that's when you really do trigger the prevailing wages. So probably maybe if I'm doing this again, I won't refer to it as clean. It's just that it's more conditioned. There are more goodies that the state is requiring if
Okay.
you do it. So maybe more goodies required to satisfy the state.
The
To
state. All right. Well, we are at time. So out of an abundance of thanks to you, Ryan Learman, for your time to give us this, appetizer of what is available in 130 and 131. And I have to think that your job just got a lot more fun. It's almost as though Skittles has, opened up an entire, new rainbow of fruit flavors of pathways to get housing done. So, which is exciting for me because, I'm on a
yeah.
mission to expand the housing stock here in Orange County so that we can house people. But thank you everybody for your time. I hope this has been informative. We will put this up on our YouTube channel under our webinar playlist. And with that, I will say thank you for your time and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ryan, very much.